All right. So anyway, I'm David Nelson, and I'm part of the YB chapter. And my co-author on this book is Doug Allshouse. Doug is also a member of the YB chapter, and he is the uh, native plant rep to San Bruno Mountain for our chapter. And we wrote a book, as Susan showed you a moment ago, the San Bruno Mountain, a guide to the flora and fauna. And here it is. It is a book published by Heyday Books in cooperation with CNPS. If we were hoping to have this as an in-person meeting, we can't. But if you want a copy, you can get one online from Heyday Books. You can also buy it from Amazon, but if you do that, Amazon makes the money. I'd rather you buy it from Heyday Books. They're a nonprofit publisher in Berkeley. And this is the front and back of the book. And you can see that San Bruno Mountain is a huge green oasis in the middle of a city. And here is Doug and I, here are Doug and I, and we call this a day at the office. We started working on this book in part from encouragement from Jake Sig. So I want to give a little shout out here to Jake. I know he's in the audience. And we worked on this for 10 years, and it has been a tremendous amount of fun. I told Doug when we started this that at the end of this book, you're going to wear out 3 pairs of boots. You're going to know 5 times more than you did before, and either you're going to love me or you're going to hate me. And he said, oh, no, I won't be able to learn anything more about the mountain. And in about a year, he said, Dave, you were right. I've learned 2 or 3 times the amount. And I have to say now, at the end of 10 years, Doug and I are very close. He's a great partner. He's the lead author because he understands this far better than I do. And it's just been wonderful. Just to give you an idea how nice he is, he's made me lunch every time for 10 years when we've gone out in the mountain. So Doug is a great guy. So where is San Bruno Mountain? Well, here's San Francisco. Here's the city limits. And right here, that is San Bruno Mountain. All right. So it's just outside of San Francisco. It's probably no more than 20 minutes away from most of you. Okay. So we all know San Bruno Mountain. We go by it on 101 and 280. And everybody knows San Bruno Mountain. Susan, do you mind if I do something? I just got back from a really neat trip, and I just got the pictures, and I only want to show like 5 or 6. So you mind if let me just exit out of this for a moment. Where is it? Okay, here. And just a second, this is my computer, and it's right here. Okay. I went on this trip, and it was just amazing. It was thick jungle. Sometimes it'd be so thick you could barely get through it. This was really representative. It was very thick. And sometimes we were going up these dry canyons with all these wild trees. And sometimes the path would go up little creeks or something like that. And the ferns were mammoth. They were bigger than people. It was wonderful. And although that looks like a species, as you know, it's the same genus, different species. And look, you never see a tree like that around here. But if you go up over the mountain onto the windward side, it totally changed. It was like the Atacama Desert. Everything was dry. The plants were adapted to it. They have little hairs on them. Even these are small, petite flowers with hairs on them to prevent dehydration. And you know where I went? That was San Bruno Mountain. Every single one of those pictures is San Bruno Mountain. You think you know the mountain because you see it from the freeway. But as a matter of fact, if you look down on it, it is a huge place with different little canyons and different exposures. Some have trees in the canyons. Some are dry. It is so varied. You need to go everywhere around on it. You can't just look at it from the freeway or from the radio road, which is what you see here. And we're always learning new things. And that's why we don't call it San Bruno Mountain Park. We call it San Bruno Mountain University. And for instance, right here in the middle of this picture, right here, okay, that's a nondescript canyon right next to the road, full of poison oak and coyote brush. And yet that's the only place where we found a long lost flower, which I'll show you later, Horace's popcorn flower. You've got to go absolutely everywhere. Now, The question is, a lot of people ask, what makes San Bruno Mountain so special? Well, there's lots of reasons, but I think I can give you one good reason. Willis Jepson wrote his first book on flowering plants in 1925. And in it, he said there were 10 different zones of endemism. And the 10th zone was right here, the Franciscan zone. Now, Jim Roof grew up around Lake Merced, and he knew the local area a lot better. And Jim Roof said, no, that's not the real Franciscan endemic zone. It's right here. It's just the southern part of Marin, the San Francisco Peninsula, and the little green dot there, that is San Bruno Mountain. He said, that's the true Franciscan zone. Now, in current terminology, this is too small to be a zone, so it's called the Franciscan landscape. But the Franciscan landscape has unique plants. But the question is, why does it have unique plants? I mean, all these other counties around here have similar areas, but why do we have unique plants? I think the answer is in geology, and let me show you why. Any area that has plants, they'll come from both paleoendemics and neoendemics. And you may know that Peter Raven and Axelrod have done a lot of work on this and written a book on it. Soil determines the plants, and the soil is entirely determined by the geology. And then the climate. And the climate is a combination of two factors, both the water regime and the temperature regime. For this part, I like to just concentrate on how does geology create unique plants. Well, here is a diagram of the peninsula of San Francisco. And right here you see this is called the San Bruno Mountain terrain. And San Francisco is made up of the San Bruno Mountain terrain. And if you look up the Marin Headlands terrain and the Alcatraz terrain, and they're separated by melange zones or faults. Now, what's a terrain? Now, this is a shortened term for a tectonostratigraphic terrain. And what a terrain is this. It's a fragment of the Earth's crust that scraped off one tectonic plate, and then it's accreted onto another tectonic plate, and it's surrounded by faults, and that terrain has a unique geologic history from all the surrounding areas. One way of looking at it is if you were hiking along and you had a bunch of mud on your boots and you scraped the mud off on the rock or the log, you'd leave a line of mud. And if you did it again, you'd leave another line of mud. And that's what's going on. As the tectonic plates hit each other, parts of the geography are scraped off. So a terrain is a fragment of the Earth's crust scraped off one tectonic plate and accreted onto another tectonic plate. And it's surrounded by faults, and that tectonic plate has a unique geologic history from all the surrounding areas. All of California, west of the Sierra foothills, was accreted onto the North American plate in a series of 33 terrains. So the Farallon plate, which preceded the Pacific plate, and this is ocean crust, it's subducted under the western edge of the North American plate during the Mesozoic era. The oceanic plates are 2.9 grams per centimeter, and the continental plates are 2.7. So the continental plates are lighter. So when they two collide, the oceanic plates always go down. And what happened, here is the Farallon plate in the upper left, North American plate on the right. As they hit each other, part of the Farallon plate was scraped off onto the North American plate. And that's what formed Alcatraz terrain, the Marin Headlands. But the San Bruno Mountain terrain is different from all the others. Now, what about it? What kinds of rocks are on the San Bruno Mountain terrain? We're primarily gray-wacky. I'll talk about that in a minute. There's also some radiolarian chert and also some serpentine. Now, you can't talk to California native plant members without talking about serpentine, so we'll talk about that, but just a little. What's gray-wacky? Gray-wacky is a particular kind of very hard sandstone. These are two specimens from San Bruno Mountain that I polished. And gray-wacky is very, very hard. Part of the San Bruno Mountain terrain extends into San Francisco, and the foundation of the cliff house is gray-wacky. Now, gray-wacky is characterized from other kinds of sandstone by having multiple sizes of sand grains. Geologists call this poorly sorted. And here's a close-up of one of my specimens from San Bruno Mountain. And you can see all the sand grains are different sizes. Now, Sand is kind of interesting. A rose is a rose is a rose, but sand is not sand is not sand. It's interesting. Sand is not a material. Sand is a size. All right. It can be quartz. It can be fish bones. It can be fish shells or seashells. So sand is defined by its size. Poorly sorted sand comes from undersea avalanches on the continental slope. And I'll show you what I mean. At the upper left, you see continental shelf. So the Sierras and the Rockies used to be about twice as tall as they are now, and they gradually eroded away. And all of that gravel and sand goes out on the continental shelf. And when the continental shelf has as much as it can handle, it falls down the continental slope. Now, a mixture of sand and water is heavier than water itself, so it flows down. And these turbidity currents can go for hundreds of miles. And when it forms rock, it's called a turbidite. Greywacke is a turbidite. It's formed by turbidity currents. The sand and greywacke and San Bruno Mountain greywacke came from the Sierra Nevadas and the Cascades as they came out into the pelagic ocean. Detrital zircon uranium-lead geochronology shows that it was formed 52 million years ago. That doesn't mean it was accreted on North America 52 million years ago, but it was formed in the pelagic ocean, in the depths of the ocean, and then by tectonic action came up on the San Bruno Mountain. Plate tectonics is very important. So we have very little radial layer and chert. We have only a small amount of serpentine. It's about 30 meters by 100 meters. There are no serpentine endemics. There aren't even facultative serpentines. Okay. Now, serpentine comes from the mantle. Remember, it's ultramafic rock. Ma comes from magnesium. Fic is from ferric iron. So these are metals which are in the mantle. They didn't float up to the crust. And as I said, we have no serpentine endemics or even facultative endemics. So the San Bruno Mountain terrain. Plate tectonics is a unifying theory for geology, just as evolution is a unifying theory for biology. Nothing in geology makes sense outside of plate tectonics. San Francisco is the type location for the Franciscan Formation. And just as plants have a type location, rocks do too. San Francisco is the type location for the Franciscan Formation. And the Franciscan Formation was key in understanding the accretionary mechanism of land formation. Now, this is not the Franciscan landscape. This is a rock Franciscan Formation. Plate tectonics and accretionary prism are what form the unique rock of San Bruno Mountain. So why do we have unique plants? I think it's unique geology. The answer is the geology. Now, both San Francisco and San Bruno Mountain share similar unique geology. San Bruno Mountain is made up of a single terrain, but San Francisco is made up of the San Bruno Mountain terrain, the Marin Headlands terrain, and the Alcatraz terrain. Now, therefore, we share some of the unique plants. And if you want to know what San Francisco looked like in 1816, at the time of the Kotzebue expedition, when the Russian ship, the Rurik, came to San Francisco, you just have to look at some of the people who were on board. Chamisso was the artist. Lupinus chamisonis, it's named after him. Chorus, Plagiobathus horacianus, the popcorn flower, chorus of popcorn flower. S. Schultz, obviously the California poppy is that. And Romanzov was the Russian oligarch who financed the expedition, and we got his name in Romanzoffia californica, the mist maidens. So I like to say, if you want to see the flowers of San Francisco before they're paved over, come to San Bruno Mountain. We've got all the San Francisco flowers. All right, now, enough of history and geology. CMPS members, they want to see plants. So let's talk about some of our rare plants. RTE, rare, threatened, and endangered. There's 18 species of these. 5 taxa are endemic. There are 8 RTE species. 2 were extirpated and then rediscovered. 3 were extirpated and then reintroduced, our same gene lines, and I'll explain that. And 2 species have been lost. All right, endemic taxa. These are the endemic taxa. And I call them taxa, not species, because these two are formas. Now, why are they formas? Arctostaphylos uber-ursi is actually found all around the northern hemisphere. It's found in northern Europe. It's found in Italy. It's found in Greece. So we can be sure that since it's got that distribution, it's been around since Pangea, before it broke up. So there's been plenty of time, millions of years, to speciate. And Parker and Vasey, who are working in this, and you probably recognize them from the Manzanita book. They did the Jepson section on Ericaceae, and they also did Flora in North America. They said that we need to do the DNA before we call these species. But Doug and Dave, you can call them species in your book because they are. They're polyploid, and they tend to form hybrids. So the taxonomy is still evolving. Now, 1/3 of them are polyploid. California is the world center for all manzanitas. 106 of 107, they've discovered one since they published the book, of all manzanitas occur in the California floristic province. And the Central Coast is a center for manzanita diversity. San Bruno Mountain is a center for speciation. And on San Bruno Mountain, Pacific Rock is ground zero. Personal communication, Parker Vasey. All right. So we have two known species that are unique. Imbricata, which is the San Bruno Mountain manzanita, and Pacifica, which was described by Roof, the Pacific manzanita. And it's interesting, our eponymous manzanita, Imbricata, was discovered by Alice Eastwood, or actually she described it. Marion Campbell found it in, I think, around 1915, and in 1925 or so, Eastwood described it. We just described 2 years ago our last endemic. Fritsch from the California Academy of Sciences and Doug Allshouse wrote this up, and it was accepted by one of the magazines, Madrono, and it's a hybrid. So let's look at some of the manzanitas. This is Manzanita Dyke, and this plant you see in front of you is Arctostaphylos imbricata, the San Bruno Mountain manzanita. It was discovered by Alice Eastwood in 1931, or described, pardon me. And you can see it's a very low-growing shrub. It's not even as high as people's shoelaces. It's very prostrate. The leaves are imbricated. That's where it gets its imbricata. They're overlapped, and like this drawing here, or like shingles on a roof. It's a very light green. A lot of ours are darker green. The hairs on them are long, glandular, and hairy. And one thing to notice, almost all of the manzanitas, in fact, most of the Ericaceae, have the similar flower. Normally, you tell plants apart by their flowers, but it turns out manzanitas all have the same flower. So you have to look at leaf shape, leaf position, hair length, hair occurrence, and stomata. Okay, so the base here has a very short petiole. It's cordate, the way the diagram shows. And these are the stomata, and they're both stomata on the upper surface and the lower surface. So here's the flower. They all look very, very similar. It's a beautiful little flower. And this is how PG&E treats our endemic manzanita. They were supposed to be clearing the road. You see the road over there on the right. But you give a PG&E man a brush cutter, and what he's going to do, he's going to go out and cut brush. So they just mowed that right down. Luckily, it all came back. Now, I'd said before that imbricata is prostrate, and I showed you that picture. But interestingly, at the adjacent crest of a ridge, here's Doug and our own Margot Boers standing next to an imbricata that's almost as tall as Doug. He's 5'9". So although it's described as prostrate, more research needs to be done. Doug and I believe that it's prostrate on Manzanita Dyke because that's almost pure rock. If you go over here to Powerline Ridge, even though it's a ridge, the soil here is at least 6 inches deep. We've dug down that far and found really good soil. So there's more to be learned on San Bruno Mountain. Now, here is another one of our manzanitas. This is Pacific manzanita, and it was described by Jim Roof in 1964. Now, this is there's only 2 known plants, so it's our rarest manzanita. And you wonder, why is it a 1B2? So Doug and I appealed, and we got it redesignated. It's a 1B1 because there's only 2 plants, and you can see the white leaves. Those are leaves being destroyed by a fungus. So they're right next to each other. They're certainly at risk for being extirpated either by a fungus, by a moth, by a fire. So the leaves are spreading. They're not imbricated. It's prostrate, fairly low. It's got almost a purely white flower. It's got these leaves that are dark green and thick, short, non-glandular, hairy on the fresh parts, the young parts. Base is acute. It's got a definite petiole, which imbricated does not have, and the upper surface and lower surface are different colors. And they have stomata above and below. Okay, so here's its flower again. It's a very pale white flower, very pretty. Okay, now there are some other ones, and I thank Margot for this photograph. This is Arctostaphylos uber-ursi, variation Leo Brewery. Now, Leo Brewer was a high temperature chemist at Berkeley. He was part of the Manzanita Project. I'm sorry, Manzanita, the Manhattan Project. And he had the largest native plant garden in the Bay Area, it was said. And so Jim Roof, who discovered this, named it after his chemistry teacher, Leo Brewery. Okay. It's mounding, and 1, 2, 3 plants here, so it's mounding. It's got ascending or spreading leaves. They're not imbricated. It's got a base that's acute. It's got a long petiole. No stomata above, only below. You can see this with a 10-power loop. But Leo Brewer's Manzanita is a little bit different. It's quite pink. And here's a picture of bifacial, different colors top and bottom. Here's a picture of the very young blossoms, and they're very, very pink. They turn a little bit paler with time, but they still have definite pink markings. So Leo Brewer's Manzanita, right there. Okay. This is our other forma. This is suborbiculata, or miniature manzanita. Walter Knight, who was author of one of the books on San Bruno Mountain and worked at the East Bay Regional Parks Garden, described this one. When he described it, the area of the plant is only in one place, is about 10 feet by 15 feet. Doug and I went off looking for another plant, and I said to Doug, wait a minute, we're all surrounded by manzanitas. We discovered an area that's probably 100 feet by 200 feet of suborbiculata. So we now know there's a lot more. So it's a mounding plant with spreading leaves. The base is acute, and there's a long petiole. And here it is. And the suborbiculata miniature manzanita, it's got very small leaves. Very pretty, very cute. Okay. Now, here's another one that's an endemic that's found on San Bruno Mountain and one other place. And this is our Monteraensis. And Doug is reaching up, and you can see the plant is taller than he can reach. And in fact, the plant is about 3 feet lower down the hill from him. So the plant's about 5 feet taller than Doug. And if you go around and look at the base is really thick. So this is our largest manzanita. It's found only on San Bruno Mountain and Montera Mountain. We have about 40 plants of it. It's an imbricated leaf, just like Arctostaphylos imbricata. No petiole, pointed tip, and cordate base. Isofacial, you can see the top and the bottom of the leaves are the same color. So here it is. And when you look at it in February, when it's in full bloom, it probably has the most robust blooming of any of our manzanitas. And as the season goes along, you get into August, all those turn into little apples or manzanitas, and it's a very prolific plant. Okay. The other plant that is endemic to San Bruno Mountain and only found in one other place is this, Lysingea germanorum. DNA has been done, and the Presidio plants have actually different DNA than ours, but their shape is sufficiently similar. They're considered one species. And so it's seen at San Bruno Mountain and the Presidio. Only found on sand. When the sand gets invaded and stabilized by grasses, it dies out. So there's a concentrated effort on San Bruno Mountain to keep weeding and keep the sand bare. The flowers, in total, the compound flowers only about an inch in size, but they're gorgeous. If you get down close and look at them, this great dark purpley throat is very pretty. This is our only federally protected species. We don't have any others. Lysingea germanorum. Okay, now some that were extirpated. Now, Plagiobothus corycianus, Chorus's popcorn flower. It was named by Chamiso for Chorus, who was the artist on the Rurik in 1816. And it was listed by McClintock in 1990 and not seen since. And this was the plant that we found under that little red dot that I showed you earlier. I was down there with Doug, and I was photographing another plant. And Doug said, Dave, get off that. That's a rare plant. And what was there? It was this, the Plagiobothus corycianus. And you'll excuse me for standing on it because it's only that big. I didn't recognize it. But Doug is very good at this. He recognized it very quickly as Boraginaceae, and that with a little bit of study after he got back, we rediscovered Chorus's popcorn flower. A lot of these things that are small, you really need magnification to appreciate their beauty. With this unfolding sign, you can see it's Boraginaceae. It's very beautiful. All right, now the creek dogwood was extirpated. She listed McClintock, who wrote the first book in 1968, said it was rare, but when she did the 1990 book, she couldn't find it at all. So it was thought to be gone. But what's funny is nature finds a way, just like it says in Jurassic Park. So it wasn't lost. It's now quite common along Colma Creek. It was buried back in the willow bushes. And here it is. It's a gorgeous plant, and it's gorgeous all year long. It's got these wonderfully sculpted leaves with a beautiful flower. And then in the fall, you've got the berries with gorgeous leaves. And then in the winter, you've got this great red bark. So it's a wonderful plant. We're very glad that it's not gone, but it came back by itself. Nature finds a way. All right. This is one we've actually lost. This is, as you know, bleeding heart. When the mountain was going to be developed by the Crocker Land Company, and they're going to take 250,000 cubic yards of dirt off the mountain, barge it down the bay south of the airport. They own 26 miles of bay land. They're going to dump all the land there. And they called it New Manhattan. They already had a name for it. Well, when they're getting ready for that, the city, the county, built a freeway right through the park to access the city. And the only place the bleeding heart was found was right along Colma Creek, in a place that was known at that time as the swimming hole. We're not sure where that is, but we think we know where the swimming hole was. But the bleeding heart disappeared. It's paved over for the Guadalupe Parkway, which was built to house all the people that Crocker Land Company wanted to do. This particular specimen is from Crystal Springs. If after a sufficient length of time we can never find the bleeding heart, we'll get permission and we'll reintroduce it. But we do have it in cultivation. Now, other ones. This is one that's been totally lost. San Francisco owl's clover, Triphysaria floribunda. It used to grow over on Oyster Point. It usually grows within 4 meters elevation of salt water, and it's not been seen since the 1960s. A number of us have gone over through there and looked for it, but the development over there was so thorough. There's so much asphalt. The owl's clover was lost. This is from Marin. That's what it would look like. 3 lobes together in a flower. So this was picture was taken by Charles Russell, 2021. All right. Well, let's talk about things that are not endemic, but they're rare. So Arctostaphylos forma coactilis, Heliantha castanea, the Diablo sunflower, Coryzanthe cuspitata, spine flower, and Collinsia multicolor, the San Francisco Collinsia. Erebus blepharophylla, close rock class. Our San Francisco wallflower, Erycibum, it's a great flower. Iris longipetala. And each of these has a story. We'll get to some of these as we go along, but they have great stories. So these are not endemic, but they're beautiful. This is blepharophylla, the coast rock cress. And this is a cute little plant. And it gets the name coast rock cress because you'll find it growing like this. And there's hardly any soil in that crack. And yet that plant seems to be happy as a clam at high tide. And it's a beautiful little pink flower. They're very delicate. Here's another one growing on the rock. There's a little bit of moss, a little bit of lichen around it. Sunlight is shining on some of the flowers. Erebus blepharophylla, very pretty. Very nice. This is our spine flower, Coryzanthe cuspitata. Again, only grows on the sand dunes that are non-stabilized. So we go through and we're pulling out grass and other things that are trying to grow over it. And you can see the little fine hairs. This helps to retain moisture because it's a dune plant. And it's got very little flowers. They're probably around 1/8 of an inch across. And if you get up really close like this, you can see that even the flowers have hairs to slow the airflow and preserve some of their moisture. This is very nice. This is our Collinsia multicolor. It's usually found in 1s or 2s, but Doug and I found at a scree slope at the bottom of a gravel quarry that they somehow or another love the scree slope and they're growing all over it in hundreds. We call that area the Boneyard Quarry because there's an owl nest up above and the owls regurgitate the pellets. Rain washes the hair, etc. away, leaves all these little bones. So there's little mouse bones all over in this quarry. So we call it Boneyard Quarry. And that's the largest group of Collinsia multicolor on the mountain. Pretty little plants, probably only gets 8 inches tall. Now, I hope most of you recognize this. This is the San Francisco wallflower. If you've ever been on San Bruno Mountain, you've smelled these. And when people smell it, the first thing they say is, wow, this has a wonderful aroma and other things like it, like flies. But you got to be careful when you smell one because here's a fly and you notice the fly's not standing up straight. So what's going on? Oh my goodness, there's a crab spider has grabbed the fly. So when you go to smell the flowers, be careful. Other creatures also like the smell of the wallflower. Now, this is our coast iris. It's a beautiful flower. It's about 3 feet tall. I told you every plant up there has a story. The Park Service wanted to put in a lawn, so they put in a lawn. And the lawn has a lot of coast iris growing in it, one of our rare plants. And they mow the lawn every year and mow all these down, and they never get a chance to bloom. We've gotten permission to transplant some. We haven't done it yet. But coast iris, very pretty. Now, this is Silene veracunda, San Francisco campion, also called catchfly. Its type location is Mount Davidson. It was described in about 1875 by Serena Watson, who took over from Asa Gray at the Harvard Herbarium. And there used to be thousands on the mountain based on some information I got from a Jepson Herbarium fellow. but they kind of disappeared. We couldn't find them for a while. And not only could we not find them, but we didn't even know how you could name parts of the plant. Like, for instance, what's that called? It's obviously a special part of the flower. What about this? What's that called? We tried really hard to find that. There's nothing in Jepson. There's nothing in the flora of North America. I finally called the author of the section for flora of North America, and I said, what are the names of these things? Do you have a picture? And he teaches in, I think it's Utah or Montana. And he said he didn't have any diagram. He couldn't name all the things for us. And I knew the important here is a diagram written by Alice Eastwood down in the California Academy of Sciences collection. So they're obviously important. Well, we did some work, some reverse engineering. I got a book printed in 1942 that was only on Silene. And what I did is I'd look through the text until the text described something like a lateral tooth that said it was really big. And then look at the picture. And by reverse engineering, we're able to figure out what the names of all these parts are. And I sent this image to the author of Flora North America. And I said, did I get it right? He said, yeah, that's right. That's right. Can I have a copy? So the only place in the world where you find this is in our book. But it described all of that. And we looked for Silene veracunda for a long time and couldn't find it. We finally did find it. This is Heliantha castanea, this Mount Diablo sunflower. This grows only on one hillside. It's got a very pretty leaf, and it grows out in the grasslands, similar to mule's ear, but different. We got the differences in the book. Okay, now, some plants that are cute, but not really rare. We don't have very many of them. This is a clematis. We found out after we discovered the two plants, they were planted by somebody on San Bruno Mountain. So somebody who's thought they were a Johnny Appleseed thought it'd be nice to put some flowers out on the mountain. And so they're putting flowers out there. You should not introduce new gene lines to any nature reserve. There's only two of these on the mountain. Now, this is fairly rare. This is our coffee fern. They're only found in 3 places, and in 2 of those places, there's a single plant. So it's quite rare on the mountain. It's common elsewhere. But it's a pretty little fern. You can see, rather than a fleshy stem, it's got a brittle stem. So it's one of the cliff breaks. I'm sure you recognize this. This is our giant trillium. Anytime you see one, it's really hard not to take a picture of them. We only have 21 plants in 3 locations, so it's not very common. But if you get out there at the right time of year, late January, early February, depending on the temperature, they're blooming and they're just gorgeous. And I'm sure whenever you see one, you're entranced with it. It's found in Trillium Gulch, down in Brisbane in one of the canyons that you really have to do some crazy hiking to see, and then in a giant poison oak bush in another place. All right, this is our white pitcher sage. Doug and I were looking for this. We couldn't find it on the mountain. And one day we're in the nursery, and oh my God, they've got them in the nursery. And he said, where'd you find these? They grow at 2 places on the mountain. And one location that's less than 20 meters by 30 meters. It's right next to Guadalupe Parkway on a horrible poison oak covered mound, small hill is where it's growing. So I mentioned before that you just have to go everywhere to see everything. And we did have to dig pretty deeply to find this. I went off down Devil's Arroyo, found some more of these down there, and the brush was so thick, I couldn't get out, and I had to get helicoptered out of the mountain. Pretty embarrassing. Now, you recognize this. This is very common in California. Western columbine. It's a gorgeous plant, but there's only one known location out on San Bruno Mountain that's wild. We've outplanted it in a number of places, but this is rare. Only one location, down in Devil's Arroyo, above something called Crystal Cave. Okay. Now, this is fairly interesting. These 3 were extirpated and then reintroduced our own gene lines through the East Bay Regional Parks Garden. Let's talk about them. This is Leo Brewery. Remember, I showed you this before. Well, it was discovered by this man, Jim Roof. And Jim found a new manzanita one time when he was hiking in May of 1964. And then shortly after that, in September, a fire came up that ridge and burned everyone to the ground. And you know, manzanitas come back in two ways: stump sprouting and seeds. None of them ever came up, and the entire population on San Bruno Mountain was lost. But not for good. Jim, remember I told you, was a gardener, founding director for the East Bay Regional Parks Garden. And when he saw it in 1964, he took cuttings. And he was an expert in rooting manzanitas. I've tried. They're very hard to get to root. And he grew them. And in 1987, we got a letter from Steve Edwards, the head of the East Bay Regional Parks Garden. And he said, basically, would you like your manzanita back? And of course, the Parks Department said yes. And one of the visions of Steve Edwards was that their park could be used to preserve plants, and they had dreaming of the possibility they could be reintroduced into the wild. So Steve Edwards gave us our plant. And they planted them in 3 different places. But nobody wrote down where they planted them. And Roman Gankin, who was the head of the park at that time for San Bruno Mountain, is now in a nursing home in Sacramento. I've spoken to him by phone. He doesn't have any idea where they are. And so we asked around, and we finally found one person who knew where they were. And he showed us to them. Oops, let's go backwards. And he showed us to them. And we showed a friend of ours, a botanist from the East Bay. And the botanist wanted to come back and see it on his own. So he went out trying to find it. He got a little bit lost. And he never found the manzanitas we showed him. But he found a second planting of the 3 that were there. And he showed us the area, very excited. And if you go there, there's a rock on top of a piece of chicken wire. You take the rock off, and you take the chicken wire off. You know those little white stakes that go in a pot in the nursery? There was one sitting there, and it said, "Our Leo Brewery." They wanted us to find that. We photographed it. We put the chicken wire back and the rock back, and it's still sitting out there on the mountain. Doug and I have gone up and down all the adjacent ridges. We've got poison oak and blackberry thorns and everything else in us. We've never found the third one. Either we've not found it or it died out. But so this is one of the ones that was extirpated on the mountain and then brought back. Now this is another one. This is Myanthemum, okay, false lily of the valley. This was growing along Radio Road, and somebody dumped a bunch of trash, as a lot of the locals do. They dumped their trash in the park and killed this. But Steve Edwards reintroduced this from the East Bay Regional Parks Garden. It's now growing on a place where you can easily walk along the bog trail and see. This is a plant that's very common in the Pacific Northwest, but it's rare here. We're the southern limit of its distribution. And although it will bloom maybe 2 or 3 blossoms out of 100 plants, we've never yet seen the berry. It has a beautiful little round, white, and red striped berry, but we've never seen it. But it's cute when you see it, the plant. All right. And this is the dune tansy. It was extirpated from the mountain. And no one knew anywhere any of it was. It was reintroduced to the mountain. Again, people didn't say where they put it. And we got an email one time from somebody saying, we found a new fern. Well, it wasn't a fern, it was a dune tansy. And it's in this rocky hillside off Radio Road. And we've also got one now growing in a little botanical garden right near the main parking lot. So dune tansy is another one that was extirpated on the mountain and then reintroduced. Okay. Now, these are just some that are interesting flowers. A lot of you probably know Aristolochia, California pipevine. It is a toxic plant, just like the milkweed produces toxins and they're transferred to the monarch. This one is transferred to the pipeline swallowtail. And this is the flower close up. You can see the opening into the flower there on the right. And if we cut it in half, this is what it looks like. And the insects have to go all the way here to get up to the flower. So this is the flower at the tip. And the thing that, the insect that pollinates it is a fungus gnat. And we found a fungus gnat inside one of the flowers. So that's the pollinator. Very specific. So what's new? What's going on? Elizabeth McClintock was at the California Academy of Sciences. And in 1968, she wrote this book, published as part of the proceedings of the California Academy of Sciences, trying to preserve knowledge of San Bruno Mountain before it gets developed and destroyed. It was reprinted in 1990. Paul Reberg, one of our chapter members, was instrumental in getting this done. But the challenge is neither of these have any color photographs, and they don't have any photographs of the flowers. And it's a little hard to have a flower book without pictures of the flowers. So that's what Doug and I set out to do. We wanted to use the digital capabilities of cameras and computers and write a color book. And that's exactly what we did. Every single page has got a ton of color. And we tried to set a new standard because not only is the picture of the flower, but there's a picture of the leaf, a thorn, or any other part that's a very interesting, unique part of that plant. So you learn more about the plant and you can identify it even if it's not in the middle of its blooming season. Okay. In addition, we're trying to make the flora comprehensive. We've got every single vascular plant on the mountain, but we've also included other things that are all part of the ecosystem. Lichens are part of every ecosystem, but they get ignored. So we've got a section on lichens with this diagram of their structure, pictures of them. We've got bryophytes. Bryophytes would be mosses, and here on the left, the upper side, you see a dry moss. On the right, the identical specimen after it's been moistened, because you may see it when it's wet, may see it's dry. We've got both phthaloid liverworts like these and leafy liverworts. And the last kind of bryophyte are hornworts. There's only one hornwort, and that's this one. But in addition to all the vascular plants, because every native or invasive plant is listed, we also have an index for all the flowers. So if you're out in the mountain and you see a particular color of flower, you can flip to this and hopefully identify your flower and then go directly to the page where the plant is described. And we try to have multiple pictures. A lot of people don't know that poison oak has a flower. Of course it's got a flower. It's an angiosperm, right? So they've got flowers and they produce seeds, and the seeds are highly prized by birds in the winter. And we tried to have close-up pictures of, say here, the filaries, because they differentiate the mule's ear from the Diablo sunflower. And this is the hazelnut. You may never have seen the flower of a hazelnut, but that's it there on the left, the little red parts sticking out. So also, as you probably know, San Bruno Mountain was preserved because of the butterflies. Our book is the only place in print or online where you can see a photograph of the top and the bottom of the wing of male and female butterflies of all 4 of our species that are rare. We also have some pictures of some of the other insects. We've got 3 native snails, 1 invasive snail. We try to include those. We've not been complete in all of the bryophytes or the insects or the birds. You just can't do that in a book this size. We already filled up our 178,000 word limit just with what we've got. But we're going to have a website, and as we get more information, for instance, we don't have any of our fungi in the book. We don't have any slime molds. They'll be on the website. So we also have a visitor's guide, where to go, a map, what to bring. And we are very proud of this. It's been a 10-year effort You can get it at Heyday Books, and hopefully sometime soon, the CNPS bookstore. It's been a lot of fun to do it. Doug has been an amazing partner, and I want to thank him for everything he's done for me. And he's first author for a reason. He's really the expert on San Bruno Mountain. And as Doug says, I'll see you on the mountain. Thanks. Susan, over to you.
Wow, that's incredible.
I see we've got some questions. Try to change your viewing options. I had a yellow bar around my thing the whole time. I hope you didn't. Jake, see if you can use your cursor to move the line between the images. Yeah, he could do that. Sorry about that. Where can we find this book? If you just Google Heyday Books on the internet, Heyday is a nonprofit publisher in Berkeley, and you can buy it directly from them. If you buy it from Amazon, Amazon makes the money. If you buy it from Heyday, a nonprofit publisher, they've got about 20 books on nature in California. They're a good one to support. Good enough. Any other questions? Just put them in the Q&A section. Do you have any questions, Susan?
Oh my gosh. I just want to thank you so much for including so much. It's just a one-stop for the flora and the fauna that you went down to the bryophytes and the lichens. Thank you so much. People ask me those questions and I'm like, I don't know. I know they're important, but I haven't been able to find a source for that information.
Yeah, we have introductory parts and diagrams that'll show you the structure of a lichen, structure, life cycle of a fern versus the life cycle of a moss. I don't know if you know the fern, the majority of the life cycle is sporophyte, but for a moss, it's a gametophyte, and same thing for liverworts. So we've got all that in there. We're trying to set a new standard for floras so that it shows the full breadth of the ecosystem, because the plants don't exist there alone. They're part of a whole ecosystem. So we're trying to give people a little idea of that. And like, for instance, we've got a checklist of all the birds that have been seen there. But if you need a bird book, you should get a bird book. But we're hoping to have more of that on the website.
It's just so nice to have the plant communities defined. I'm still discovering plant communities. You've got plant communities I didn't even know we had.
Yeah. And remember, Doug and I are part of this chapter. So we put in our newsletter about 6 times a year hikes that we give. Doug leads them. And we'd love to show you our love of life, the San Bruno Mountain. And our next project is going to be working on a guide to Devil's Slide. We're meeting in January 21 with geologists from Stanford, USGS, and San Francisco City College. And we're going to try to have geology, plants, and seabirds. Our own Eddie and Noreen are going to do the seabirds for us. So,
fantastic.
Is there a link to your hikes? It will be on the Yerba Buena chapter newsletter whenever there's hikes in the calendar section.
So we do have a part of the on the Yerba Buena site. Let me add that to the Zoom. So this is where all of our field trips are set, and we also do restoration parties where we take out weeds and add native plants, especially during the rainy season. So, and we've got restoration parties all over the city, and we've got hikes in wonderful areas like the ones that you do for San Bruno Mountain.
And I'd just like to mention that San Bruno Mountain Watch is a nonprofit organization that's been in existence since the park was owned by the Crocker Land Company. They helped preserve it. And they have a nursery, and they also give hikes. And they have work parties. If you want to go out and plant natives on San Bruno Mountain from the nursery, they do that several times a year.
Oh, Beth, thank you so much for adding the CNPS meetup site. I appreciate that.
Okay. Well, it's been a real pleasure doing this for you. Remember, we are part of chapter. The chapter donated $3,000 to help this book get published, so I really appreciate that. And it's no big secret. Doug donated $50,000 to get the book.
Oh my gosh.
We had a fundraising effort. We raised $25,000, but Heyday required us to raise $75,000 to get it published. So Doug closed out part of his retirement, and he pushed us over the finish line.
Wow.
Right, real dedication. There's a reason why he's the first author. He knows the plants better than I do, and he wrote it, and he financed it. He's a good man.
Let's see if we've got any more questions. Oh yeah, we do.
Well, okay, let's talk about conservation on San Bruno Mountain. It is now covered by the nation's first habitat conservation plan. When Congress passed the Endangered Species Act in 1973, they said animal, and they thought they were preserving buffaloes and condors and things like that. But a subspecies of insect is an animal, and the snail darter, a little fish the size of your little finger, swimming around in a river in Tennessee, is an animal. And a lot of people were upset. Some of the people who didn't have conservation blood in them said, "You're stopping us from doing development." And in 1983, when the Endangered Species Act was getting up for reenactment, there were people that wanted to get rid of the whole thing. In fact, one senator from Utah got his state exempted because he wanted to build a dam and kill a bunch of sandhill cranes. So there was a big talk about abolishing it. Well, Congress was aware of the compromises going on in San Bruno Mountain, and a bunch of people from San Bruno Mountain went back and testified at Congress. And Section 10A, the Endangered Species Act, allows limited take kill if the net benefit of money given preserves the species. Now, the HCP had some serious flaws, but it was the very first time it was done. So San Bruno Mountain is preserved by an HCP. It's an agreement between 3 local governments and the federal government. So no more development can be done. And you have seen maybe the various houses being built on there. All of those were part of the 1983 agreement for San Bruno Mountain. But just because it's not being destroyed by houses doesn't mean it's not being destroyed. We're losing 11 acres of land per year to scrub encroachment and weed encroachment, based on aerial photographs that are in the library at University of Santa Cruz, done in 1943 aerial surveys. So we are slowly losing the battle for the mountain. And part of that is because the county of San Mateo has not dedicated adequate funds to fulfill their requirements. I'm working on a paper now trying to convince the Board of Supervisors to generate some more money. So it will not be developed. It cannot be developed, ever, by man, but it can be destroyed by weeds. And San Bruno Mountain Watch has work parties up there all the time. There is money in the HCP Foundation. We spend a couple $100,000 of brush control and weed control, both physical removal and chemical removal. I know Jake's a big proponent of it, and you just go up to San Bruno Mountain, you can realize there's no way you could ever remove all the pest spray by hand. You got to spray it. But we are slowly losing the battle, and conservation effort still needs to be done. Now we've got another Q&A here. What's your favorite trail? Ooh, there's a different trail that's a favorite at different times of the year. If it's raining and you want to really see a tropical forest, go over to Brisbane. If you want to see flowers in springtime, the Ridge Trail is wonderful. If you want to see manzanitas, you need to go on one of our hikes, because the majority of them are off trail and it's illegal to go there. So I don't know if I could say I've got any one. And it's amazing how you've got to go down each trail, each season of the year, because there's different things. We found got scarlet, blocking on the name, tubular flower, fuchsia. We used to think they only grew under the radio towers facing the ocean. Well, one day we went on a hike facing the bay, and a hike we usually do in January. We did in October, and we found the fuchsia. So you got to go in every path every day of the year. Is the dune portion preserved forever? The Aristolochia, or the pipeline butterfly, flies there. I don't know whether green hair streaks have been seen there. Parts of it are preserved, but parts of it are privately owned of the dunes. There's an effort to try to get the dunes committed to the park. Negotiations are going on with the landlord. Certainly, if the landlord tries to bulldoze it, create a soccer field, which is their plan, they'll be sued, and we'll try to stop it. But it's better if he can avoid lawsuits and whatnot. So part of it is preserved, part of it is not. All of the rest of the perimeter of the park is preserved, and the habitat conservation plan is larger than the park. And there are some outside areas which are scheduled to be deeded to the park, but the county doesn't want the land till it's cleaned up, because they don't want to have to do the cleanup. They want the person donating the land to clean it up. And some of the housing up on Forest Hill and all the ones down in Crocker Park, all that is within the HCP, so they pay us money every year. The original houses pay $45 a year. The most recently built houses pay $800 a year. So it sounds like we could have done better negotiating at the beginning. But that's part of what gives us our money. And if a person has a real desire to find out about green hair streak, probably Liam O'Brien is the best person to talk to. Doug may know. We have some green butterflies that are similar to hair streak. Whether it's a hair streak or not, I don't know. Any other questions?
And we do have a question from Patty in the chat.
I'm in the chat and I don't see it.
All the way at the bottom.
Read the question to me.
What are creeks and streams on the mountain, and what are those plant communities?
Yeah. We have 4 or 5 permanently flowing creeks. They don't flow a lot, but they're enough to generally keep, say, Woodwardia fibrillata alive. We have some that keep yellow-eyed grass alive. So there's a creek that flows down April Brook, goes out Coleman Creek Canyon. There's one in Guadalupe Canyon. There's one on the southeast side, and you get down in some are deep in a canyon with an oak coverage. Some are flowing just through coyote brush. So the chorus of popcorn flower grows within 2 feet of one of these little creeks. We've got 11 different ferns. Not all of them are on creeks, but some of them are. Certainly Woodwardia and the lady fern. I like to say lady fern always grows with its feet in the water. But some of them are xerophilic, just like bracket fern. You see it out on a dry hillside in the grass. So I don't know if that answered that. Any other questions?
Yeah, Bob Hall
is not able to answer because he could give you a good answer for any question. He really knows the area.
So Bob Hall is asking, wondering about the dunes because it hosts the coast buckwheat and the deerweed that the coastal green hair streak need.
Right. We actually have deerweed in other places on the mountain. The 2 that are unique there are the San Francisco lozenge and the spine flower. They require shifting sand. if the sand gets stabilized by ice plant or by grasses, they give up. So those are the ones we try to do that. But deerweed grows in a number of places. And what was the other plant?
The coast buckwheat.
Oh, that's all over. That's a very widespread buckwheat. We've got it.
Nice.
Come on out sometime with Doug and I, and we'd be glad to show you our favorite mountain.
Sounds wonderful. All right. I think that's it for the questions.
All right.
David, thank you so much. This is incredibly informative, wonderful presentation, and an amazing book. Thank you so much for the good work.
And we had one question about nude buckwheat. Is a great story on that. We found one plant, marked it with an orange marker, called the county, told them where it was, not to hurt it, and the next week it got mowed.
Oh,
The roots stayed. We babysat it and whatnot. It's never come back. The county, as Doug says, if you give a workman a brush mower, he only knows one thing to do with it, and he's going to brush mow any native plant that he finds.
wow.
All right. Good night, everyone. Thank you for the pleasure of having me speak. Good night.
Thank you all.